The air inside the library smelled of dust and ink, a scent that clung to the wooden shelves like a forgotten secret. The Montague Archives had stood in the heart of the city for over 2 centuries, its collection unmatched, its legends even more so. Scholars whispered of an unseen caretaker, a figure who roamed the halls after midnight, tending to books no one had ever catalogued. Charlotte Hale had never believed in ghosts, but she believed in knowledge. As a historian, she prided herself on separating truth from myth, yet something about the stories of the Shadow Archivist intrigued her. She had spent weeks researching, poring over old blueprints and forgotten records. No librarian had been officially employed there past midnight, yet the sound of turning pages had been reported long after the doors were locked. Tonight, she would uncover the truth. The grand oak doors groaned as Charlotte slipped inside. The library was silent but alive, a hushed presence looming in the endless rows of books. She moved carefully, her footsteps muffled by the thick crimson carpet. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, the chandeliers unlit, casting strange shapes in the moonlight that filtered through stained glass windows. She made her way to the oldest section, the Whispering Isle. The name had always unsettled her, though no one seemed to know why it was called that. The books here were ancient, their spines cracked with age, their titles worn away. Charlotte ran her fingers along the edge of a shelf, feeling the ridges of forgotten stories. Then, she heard it. A soft rustling. She froze. It wasn't the sound of rats or settling wood. It was the unmistakable whisper of pages turning. She took a slow step forward, her heart drumming against her ribs. The sound came from deeper within the aisle. Her breath hitched as she turned a corner and saw it. A figure, cloaked in shadows, hunched over an old desk. Their fingers, long and pale, traced the pages of a massive book. Their head was bowed, obscured by a hood, but Charlotte could see the slow, deliberate motion as they read. She should have run. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to turn back. But curiosity, that cursed thing, rooted her in place. "Who are you?" she whispered. The figure didn't react. Charlotte took another step. The air around her grew dense, thick with something she couldn't name. She licked her lips, trying again. "Are you the archivist?" This time, the figure stilled. Slowly, painfully slow, they lifted their head. Charlotte's breath caught. Their face was shrouded in darkness, features shifting like ink swirling in water. Eyes, if they could be called that, flickered within the void of their face, watching her without pupils, without whites, just black upon black. The book before them snapped shut. Charlotte staggered backward as the figure rose. Their presence was oppressive, ancient, wrong. The shadows around them pulsed, stretching toward her like living things. And then, the figure whispered. A single word. A name. Her name. The lights flickered violently, and the library groaned as if the very walls were shifting. Charlotte turned to run, but the moment she did, the books around her began to whisper back. A cacophony of voices, soft, urgent, pleading. She wasn't supposed to be here. And now, she might never leave. Charlotte's breath hitched as the whispered echoes of her name twisted through the library. The books themselves seemed to murmur in countless voices, some frantic, others solemn, as if bearing witness to something inevitable. She stumbled backward, her pulse hammering in her ears. The hooded figure remained still, a statue draped in ink and shadow. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, they extended a hand toward the massive book they had been reading. The book slid across the desk toward her, though no hands touched it. Charlotte's body screamed at her to flee, but her mind, her insatiable curiosity, refused to listen. She hesitated, glancing down at the book's cover. The leather binding was cracked and peeling, its title long since faded. Yet something felt unmistakably alive about it, as though the words inside still breathed. The figure whispered again. "Read." The word slithered through the air, its weight pressing against her skull. Charlotte swallowed hard. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The shadows around the figure writhed, restless. "You are in it." Her stomach lurched. She stared at the book as icy tendrils of dread curled around her ribs. Slowly, almost against her will, she reached out. Her fingers brushed the cover. It was warm. Too warm. The moment she flipped it open, the library shifted. The stained glass windows no longer glowed with moonlight. they were black as the abyss. The towering shelves seemed impossibly tall now, stretching into an endless void above her. Even the air changed, thick with the scent of old paper and something else, something metallic. Charlotte's hands trembled as she scanned the first line on the yellowed page. Charlotte Hale entered the Whispering Isle at precisely 12:03 a.m., unaware that she had already been written into the archives. Her mouth went dry. She flipped to another page, further in. She felt the weight of the archivist's gaze upon her. She would soon learn that history is not only recorded, it is rewritten. Her breath came in shallow gasps. This was impossible. Impossible. Her fingers itched to turn to the final page, to see how her story ended. But something told her she wouldn't like the answer. Slowly, she lifted her gaze back to the figure. "What is this?" she demanded. The archivist took a slow step forward, and the darkness around them sighed, as if exhaling. "The library remembers," they murmured. "But memories can be changed." Charlotte clutched the book to her chest. "What do you mean?" The flickering void where their face should have been tilted slightly, considering her. "Not every story is finished." With that, the lights flickered again, and for a brief, terrible moment, Charlotte saw what lay beyond the shelves. Endless corridors, stretching into darkness. And in the distance, more figures, watching, waiting. The library was much, much larger than she had ever imagined. And she had only just begun to read. Charlotte stood frozen, the heavy book clutched to her chest. The archivist did not move, but the very air around them seemed to bend and breathe, as if the darkness itself had a pulse. Beyond the shelves, the vast, endless corridors stretched further than should have been possible. The Montague Archives was large, but not this large. She had spent weeks researching its architecture, its history. There were limits to its structure. Yet here she stood, facing a library that should not exist. The book in her hands was the only thing grounding her to reality. She forced herself to glance down, scanning the text for an answer. Charlotte Hale did not yet realize that the moment she opened this book, she had become part of the archive. A shiver ran through her spine. She turned another page, desperate. The words shifted before her eyes, rearranging themselves as if the book knew she was reading it. She wanted to run, but she wouldn't. Not yet. She was too curious. Her breath caught. She was too curious. But how could it know that? Charlotte snapped the book shut and stepped backward. "This is some kind of trick," she whispered. "A hallucination, a dream." "The archive does not dream." The archivist's voice was impossibly soft, but it rang in her ears as if spoken from within her own skull. Charlotte flinched. "You are mistaken," they continued. "The library has always been this way. You have simply never seen it before." "That's not true," she argued, her voice shaking. "I've studied this place. I know every inch of its history." The archivist took another step forward. The air rippled, and the bookshelves around her shifted. The aisles expanded, rearranging themselves like a maze in motion. Charlotte spun around, her stomach twisting. The entrance was gone. She was surrounded now, enclosed in an aisle that had not been there moments before. "History is written," the archivist murmured. "But the archive rewrites." A book on the shelf beside her slid forward with a whispering sigh. Its pages fluttered open on their own. Charlotte's name was written inside. She reached out with shaking fingers. The moment she touched the page, an image bloomed in her mind. So clear, so real that she nearly gasped. She saw herself, standing in this very spot. But behind her, just beyond the nearest shelf, a shadow loomed. A figure. No, figures. She spun wildly, her pulse a frantic drumbeat. Nothing. But the book had shown her something. Something was here with her. She turned back to the archivist, her voice raw. "What do you want from me?" The shadows around them curled inward, coiling like living ink. "To decide." Charlotte swallowed hard. "Decide what?" The archivist lifted a pale, long-fingered hand and gestured to the endless aisles. "To stay," their flickering, shifting eyes locked onto hers. "Or to leave." Charlotte exhaled sharply. "You're giving me a choice." The archivist inclined their head. Every story has choices. She looked down at the book again. Her name, her life, her past, her future, written inside. But was it hers? Or was something else rewriting her? Slowly, carefully, she turned to the last page. The final sentence wasn't finished. It ended in an open space, an empty line waiting to be written. Waiting for her. A chill crept through her veins. She realized, with a terrible certainty, that whatever she chose next would not just decide her fate. It would become it. Charlotte stared at the final, empty line in the book. A space waiting for ink. Waiting for her choice. The weight of it pressed against her chest, heavier than the book in her hands. The archivist remained still, watching. Their presence was less of a person and more of a force, something ancient, something inevitable. Charlotte's fingers hovered over the blank space, a cold sweat forming at the back of her neck. If she wrote in this book, would it trap her here? Would it seal her fate in ink? Or had her fate already been written, long before she ever stepped into this place? She clenched her jaw. No. That couldn't be true. She still had agency. She had to. I don't understand, she said, her voice hoarse. What happens if I write? The archivist tilted their head, the motion slow and deliberate. You will be recorded. Charlotte swallowed. And if I don't? The shadows coiled around their form, shifting like living ink. Then your story will be finished. A cold dread settled in her gut. What does that mean? She asked, even though she already suspected the answer. The archivist didn't reply. Instead, they raised a single, long-fingered hand and gestured toward the bookshelves that lined the endless corridors. For the first time, Charlotte realized, some of the books were rotting. The spines were splitting apart, the pages crumbling into dust. And as she watched, one of them gave a shuddering sigh and disintegrated completely, vanishing into nothingness. She sucked in a sharp breath. The ones who do not write, the archivist murmured, are forgotten. Charlotte's knees felt weak. She steadied herself against the wooden desk, her breath shallow. This wasn't just a library. It was an archive of people, of lives, of stories that either continued or were erased. Her heart pounded as she looked at the book again. The last page still waited, the blank line patient but insistent. She didn't want to be erased. But she didn't want to be trapped, either. What if I write something different? She asked suddenly. Something unexpected. The archivist stilled. The shadows around them seemed to hesitate, as if such a thought had never occurred to them. Charlotte's mind raced. She had been following the story as it was written, as it was expected to be. But what if she changed it? What if she rewrote herself? Her fingers trembled as she reached for the fountain pen resting beside the book. It was old, its metal cold beneath her touch. She placed the tip against the page. And wrote. Charlotte Hale was not meant to be here. And yet, she was. Because she chose to be. The moment the ink touched the paper, the library shuddered. The shelves groaned, the air thickening as if the entire space was rearranging itself. The archivist took a step back, the swirling void of their face unreadable. Charlotte gritted her teeth and kept going. She was not merely a story to be recorded. She was the writer of her own fate. The shadows recoiled violently. The walls trembled. Books fell from their shelves, pages fluttering like panicked birds. A low whisper filled the air, not from the archivist, but from the library itself. 1,000 voices overlapping, questioning, resisting. The archivist took another step back. The endless corridors behind them began to darken, the shelves dissolving into ink. Charlotte's breath came in sharp bursts, her heart hammering. The book was changing. The library was changing. And then, the final sentence appeared on its own, written by an unseen hand. Charlotte Hale made her choice. The world lurched. And everything went black. Charlotte awoke to silence. Not the kind of silence that came with peace, but the kind that felt wrong. Heavy. Expectant. She wasn't in the library anymore. At least, not the one she had known. She sat up slowly, her body aching as if she had fallen a great distance. Beneath her, the ground was paper. Endless sheets of parchment stretched in every direction, shifting gently as if breathing. She swallowed hard. This wasn't possible. The sky above her, or what should have been the sky, was a vast expanse of ink, swirling and restless. Words drifted within it, written in every language she could imagine, appearing and vanishing like whispers in the dark. Charlotte exhaled sharply, steadying herself. "Where am I?" A voice answered, but it wasn't the archivist's. Between the pages. She turned sharply. A figure stood before her, unlike the archivist but no less unsettling. This one was draped in parchment instead of shadow, its body composed of layered, fragile pages that rustled as it moved. Its face was a smooth, unreadable mask of yellowed paper. Charlotte's fingers clenched. "I made my choice. I wrote my own story. So why am I here?" The figure cocked its head. Because a story is never just ink on a page. It is what is remembered. She shivered. Then what happens now? The figure's paper fingers unfolded, revealing an open book within its grasp. It was hers. The same book she had written in. But now, the last page, the one she had rewritten, was blank again. Her stomach twisted. She reached out and touched it, expecting to feel the warmth of paper. But instead, the book rippled, and she felt something pull at her. A rush of memories, of moments in time, her past, her present, the very threads of her existence, twisting, unraveling, waiting to be rewritten. She gasped and yanked her hand back. The figure nodded slowly. "You have become part of the archive, Charlotte Hale. Your story can be told, or erased. But you are no longer just a reader." Charlotte's pulse pounded in her ears. She wasn't trapped in the library. She was trapped in the story itself. And the worst part? She didn't know how it would end. Charlotte's breath came fast and shallow. The pages beneath her feet shifted, soft as whispers, rustling like something alive. Above her, the ink-dark sky churned, words appearing and dissolving in the void. She was inside the archive now. Inside the story itself. And she didn't know how to escape. The paper figure stood motionless, holding her book with its final, empty page. The longer she looked at it, the more she felt something pulling at her, tugging at her memories, her past, the very essence of what made her Charlotte Hale. She gritted her teeth and stepped back. "You're trying to rewrite me." The figure didn't move. "Everything is rewritten, eventually." Charlotte's fingers curled into fists. No, her voice was steadier than she felt. "That's not true. Stories can change, but they don't have to be erased." The ink sky above her trembled. For a brief moment, the shifting words stilled. The figure took a step forward. The pages of its body fluttered, the text written upon them rearranging itself with each motion. "You misunderstand," it whispered. "To remain unwritten is to fade. To be forgotten." Charlotte shook her head. "No. To be changed is different from being erased." She reached out and grabbed the book. The figure did not resist. The cover was warm in her hands. She flipped to the last page, the empty space waiting, expectant. She could feel it now. This place, the archive, wasn't just a library. It wasn't even just a collection of recorded lives. It was alive, and it needed stories to exist. Without them, it would wither, fade into nothing. And she was part of it now. A terrible thought struck her. How many others had been here before her? Had they, too, faced this choice? Had they chosen to let themselves be rewritten? Or had they fought, only to be swallowed by the ink? She couldn't let that happen to her. Charlotte tightened her grip on the book. She still had a choice. She always had. She pressed the pen to the page and wrote. Charlotte Hale was not just a story to be recorded. She was the one who would remember. The moment the ink touched the parchment, a sound like tearing paper filled the air. The sky above rippled, words bleeding into light. The archive shuddered. The parchment figure took a step back, its form unraveling, pages peeling away into the wind. Charlotte's heart pounded. She kept writing. She would not be lost. She would not be erased. She would return. A force surged around her, pulling at the world itself. The ground beneath her feet split apart, pages crumbling into dust. And then, she was falling. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was the words on the book's final page. Not just her words, but words written back to her. Then remember. And everything went white. Charlotte awoke with a gasp. She was back. The Montague archives loomed around her, solid and real. The endless, shifting corridors of the archive were gone. The ink sky, the parchment ground, nothing remained of that strange, impossible place. She lay sprawled on the cold marble floor, her fingers still curled around the book. The same book. But something felt different. She sat up, her breath ragged, and flipped to the final page. The last sentence was still there. Then remember. The ink shimmered as if it had only just dried. A shiver ran through her. Slowly, she turned her head. The library was empty. No archivist. No whispering books. No shifting shelves. Had it all been real? Charlotte's hand trembled as she traced the cover of the book. And that's when she noticed it. Her name was no longer on it. Her heart pounded. She flipped through the pages. The entries were still there, but they weren't about her anymore. The words had shifted, twisted into something else. Names she didn't recognize. Stories she had never seen. Someone else was written here now. She snapped the book shut, her pulse a frantic drumbeat. Had she escaped? Had she truly rewritten herself? Or had the archive simply moved on, to someone new? She pushed herself up, swaying slightly. The library around her felt unchanged, yet she could feel something beneath the surface, a presence, watching, waiting. Her gaze flickered toward the far end of the room. The large, antique mirror near the entrance stood untouched. She took a hesitant step toward it, a deep unease curling in her stomach. The reflection staring back at her was wrong. She looked like herself. Same dark hair, same sharp eyes. But the way her reflection moved, just a fraction of a second too late, as if adjusting to her actions rather than mirroring them. Charlotte's breath hitched. She raised a hand. The reflection followed. She tilted her head. The reflection did the same. Then, it smiled. Charlotte did not. A cold, creeping horror seeped into her bones. The smile on her reflection widened, stretching too far, as if the very fabric of the glass was distorting. The archivist's voice whispered in her mind, soft as turning pages. Not every story is finished. The mirror shattered, and the lights in the library flickered out. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment below. I love hearing your thoughts. If you're craving more mysteries, thrillers, and spine-chilling tales, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss out on the next chapter. The darkness is always waiting, and the next story could be just around the corner. See you in the next one, if you dare.